Sometimes when you look through the newspaper-covered windows of Classroom 42 from the hallway, you could just make out the figures of chairs and tables inside the classroom. And then, just as you were about to move your face away and go back, you could swear you saw the faint outline of a single figure moving back and forth in the room. This is a room that has been locked for the past 50 years. I go to an old boarding school. It's a big old school, and by old I mean about 200 years old. It has a rich history and has gone through several renovations over the years. Out of these 6 buildings in the school, all of them except Block D have been completely renovated to be modern and in line with current standards. Block D is not used for dorms or classrooms, and is mostly a building for dingy entertainment rooms and just general common areas. Block D was a mass playground for us. We spent cold winter nights cozy under blankets inside those rooms, telling each other scary stories. We also spent our summer days cooling off under the air conditioner and watching TV in that block. The teachers didn't mind and also treated it as an open area, where the 42 rooms were left open for students to relax in. We were all old enough to take care of ourselves, and the teachers took rounds around the hallways to make sure that we were all doing okay. The only problem with Block D was Classroom 42. It was at the end of the hallway on the 3rd floor, locked and abandoned for so long, even our current teachers don't remember why it was locked. However, there is an unspoken, well-enforced rule. Avoid Classroom 42 at all costs. In the short 4 years that I've been at the school, no one has ever attempted to even turn the knob on the door of that room. It's locked in, that's it. All its windows are covered by a layer of newspapers, thick enough to be able to see faint silhouettes through. Upon closer inspection, the newspapers are all dated from the 1970s, which is what led us all to believe that the room had been locked for the past 50 years. And oh yeah, we're not stupid. The newspapers have been put on from the inside. Otherwise, we would have taken them off to peek in a long time ago. The teachers also keep quiet about it, not letting on anything or just telling us to avoid the room in general. That it's locked for a reason and it should not be entered. One teacher went on to tell us that some bad things happen there, and that it's not worth it to go there just for curiosity. You know that moment in which luck somehow aligns so perfectly that something impossible somehow becomes possible? Yeah, that's what happened with me when I found myself just walking past Classroom 42 before realizing that one of the newspapers from the windows had been taken off. Several chills ran up my spine as a deep pit formed in my stomach. Don't look inside. I repeated this to myself as I walked past the classroom, but I couldn't help myself. Now, before you criticize my decision to look inside the small gap that wasn't covered by newspapers, I want you to really think. Imagine you have been going past a box every day that was always closed and that you could never open. Worse still, people told you that there were bad things inside that box. And then one day, you see a hole inside that box, just big enough to look through. Would you look inside? I know that I would, because that's exactly what I did. I peered right into that gap until my nose blocked me from pressing my face any further. I could see all white in that gap. The whiteness was permeated by red lines that ran like cracks through it. They led all the way to a deep sea of inky black. It's only when the pupil quickly shifted right into my own right eye did I realize what I was looking at. I backed away and yelped, which let me slip and fall straight down on my backside. Pain shot up my lower spine, and I quickly scrambled up to my feet. Before I could run away though, I found a thin hand with long, slender fingers wrapped around my ankle. It pulled me with such strength that it knocked me right off my feet. I saw a blur of more hands emerging from the slightly ajar door of the classroom before the back of my head slammed against the marble floor. My vision darkened and in a few moments, I had lost consciousness. When my eyes first fluttered open, my vision was blurry and out of focus. A sharp ringing filled my ears as my vision adjusted. I found myself looking up at a ceiling fan, and I nearly forgot what had happened to me earlier. It's fascinating how in the few seconds of consciousness, I somehow convinced myself that I had had a nasty fall, a bad dream, and I was now in the sickbay lying down on one of the beds. But that train of thought was quickly abolished by the fact that I could feel cold hard tile beneath me. I was lying down on the floor, probably still in the same hallway. So I slowly got up, wincing when I tried to move my ankle. Before I could tend to my ankle, I noted my surroundings. My stomach dropped beyond the floor when I found myself in the middle of an old-fashioned classroom, with worn wooden desks and a black, dusty chalkboard. Come to think of it, I was surprised at the fact that I didn't realize how dim the place was, with the light struggling to pass through layers of newspaper that had been applied to the windows. This got adrenaline flowing through my body, and I suddenly backed away to the corner of the room, even though there was no real danger that I could see. Instead, I craved the comfort of having my back covered by a wall, instead of being exposed out in the open. Nothing came for me, and after a few moments of anticipation, and my heart nearly breaking my ribcage with every beat, I exhaled. "Calm down, Ethan. You can do this." I repeated the mantra in my head again as I got up. The pain in my ankle flared up, and I dropped to the floor clumsily. Upon examination, my ankle was very bruised, with the bruises forming the shape of thin, slender fingers wrapped around it. I shuddered at the thought, and instead focused my mind on getting out of the classroom. The door seemed unlocked, and so I got up once more, careful with my ankle, and I skipped over to it. As I opened the door, my hope was crushed and my mind was twisted in confusion. The door opened up, not to the hallway but to an identical classroom, with the same newspapers covering the windows, as if somebody had copy and pasted the entire room over on the other side. I stepped into it, having no real choice. The door closed behind me with a large thud, making me jump out of my skin and shift too much weight on my ankle as I prepared to run. Consequently, my ankle collapsed under the weight and I fell through the floor. You know those images you see of hypothetical four-dimensional objects? You know how your mind hurts the more you try to make sense of them. That's exactly how I felt when I fell through the floor, as if it was a thick liquid. Making sense of how I managed to fall through the floor was the last of my concerns though, because almost immediately, I realized that I couldn't breathe. I kept on sinking into the absolute darkness, a black so deep I felt as if I had lost my sense of vision and was instead wrapped up in millions of layers of blankets and falling constantly. It's hard to describe. Imagine skydiving but while being blind and covered in lots of heavy blankets. That's how it felt, like sinking beyond the floor into the abyss. All the while my lungs burned, threatening to burst. They demanded air, but I couldn't breathe. And that's when I felt the most scared I had ever felt in my life. One emotion you've been doing since you were born was now impossible. I literally could not suck in air. Nothing went to my empty lungs like I was in the vacuum of space. And then I hit the bottom. I felt it because a strong vibration went through my feet and I no longer felt like I was falling. The darkness seemed to unravel like a cloth was being lifted from above my eyes and I found myself at a beach. Everything was wrong. I was standing on water with the sands rolling in and out in waves. Its abrasive sound filled the air as a bright red sun set on the horizon. The water didn't feel wet, yet it felt like water. The sand acted like a liquid. I stepped out towards the waves of sand and one of them licked my toes, leaving countless cuts all over my skin and scratching my nails. I jumped backwards, splashing in the water. Except the water didn't splash. It rippled like a mattress and settled once more. A man walked up behind me. At first I didn't notice him, but when he tapped me on my shoulder, I definitely did. He looked like any ordinary man you would see in everyday life. A stranger who wouldn't pay much attention to, and you would forget the next day. "Do you know why you are here?" he asked. No," I stuttered, overwhelmed by his calm composure. "You shouldn't have peeked into the classroom. It's a place that broke into our dimension, our realm. We live a realm above you, in which your mind won't comprehend what you see because you simple creatures aren't designed for it," he stated while looking at me in pity. "Okay, just please let me out," I pleaded. "No, you are our gateway," he said as armies of creatures marched ahead behind him. They came from behind the horizon and looked like nothing that I had ever seen. Remember the fourth dimensional shapes? That's how they looked. Impossible and unable to describe. I can't put into words how horrifying and strange they were. I couldn't focus on any single creature without a sharp migraine building up in my head, and my eyes glazing over, their features unable to discern anything. They didn't even have a color. No, they were transparent. It just wasn't a color that existed. I know this doesn't make sense because it really doesn't. Our minds aren't wired to see these creatures or even perceive this reality properly. It's like seeing electromagnetic waves or UV light. We simply can't. I started to sink into the water below me and into the same abyss that I had found myself in when entering this place. My lungs struggled and searched for air once more, but there was none. After a long moment, I found the darkness unravel around me once more, and I found myself in that same classroom, with the door unlocked. I ran out, ignoring the pain in my ankle, desperate to escape the nightmare. But nothing was right. I could move through space, but not in a literal sense. No, that doesn't make sense. I could see myself moving forward, but it was like walking through a video game, all two-dimensional, with no genuine feeling of actually moving. I walked out into the hallway and struggled to even walk, probably as my mind fractured further. I felt like I was having a stroke. Nothing was recognizable. Made little sense. The world was composed of familiar objects, but upon focus, seemed unfamiliar and wrong. I could no longer walk around, utterly disoriented. I woke up in the local hospital surrounded by nurses and doctors. Apparently, I had had a genuine stroke, possibly caused by my fall on the floor. I tried to tell the doctors about the classroom, the strange beach, and the abyss that I fell into, but they ignored me. They listened, but they treated me like a madman, with my mind fractured beyond repair. When my friend came to visit, I asked him about Classroom 42, and he told me that they had found the door open when they had found me on the floor. Apparently, the teachers had closed the door immediately after, but something was wrong. The door kept opening by itself every 15 minutes, with the cold air coming from the classroom, like the freezers in a grocery store. I can see them everywhere now. They are slowly leaking into our realm, taking us over. To them, we're two-dimensional weaker beings that they can manipulate on command. They walk around everywhere, permeated our world more and more. I bet there are thousands of portals such as our own, Classroom 42, waiting to be activated by a curious person. Their reality is bleeding into ours, and soon they will take over. I can feel it. The man visited me again yesterday, this time morphed into another form. I was still in the psych ward, rambling about creatures being everywhere. They all felt sorry for me and no one believed me. No one saw him when he stepped right beside my bed and spoke in my ear. "Thank you for activating the portal. Maybe we will spare you."